All right, I want to talk to you about Sorcerer. This is an impressive new release from the Criterion Collection coming out on Tuesday, June 24th, 2025. This is a preview copy. I kind of did a little bit of a introductory walkthrough in a recent clip when I first took delivery from the Criterion Collection, and it is quite a package. Really, absolutely a contender for one of my favorite releases of the year so far, and very well could be right up there towards the top when the year is all said and done. Now, I have had this edition of Sorcerer on my shelf for quite a few years. This is a film that was very tough to see and obtain, especially in a good quality edition, but this is a Blu-ray that came out, I'd say about 10 years ago, maybe more, maybe less. Let's see what it says here. Of course, it says 1977. Yeah, so 2014, there's a little copyright line in there, is when Warner's released this, Warner Brothers. Beautiful little package, you know, nice little illustrated book. There's also a letter from William Friedkin that it's floating around the house here somewhere. But yeah, you know, thick pages, illustrations, essay by Friedkin himself. And as it says here, the toughest, most relentless American film in a long time. This is a kick-ass movie about men who's really, they've managed to screw up their life, hit rock bottom, land in this desperate place, miserable, wretched poverty. They don't really belong there, but that's where they wound up, and they've got to find a way out. And it's Desperation City for sure. These four guys come from different walks of life. Is an American, kind of a gangster, driver, kind of a low-level mafioso type in the mob, and he gets in an accident during a robbery of a Catholic church during a wedding. I mean, pretty sleazy business, and he has to go on the lam because he messed up a big job, and there's bad guys after him. Another one is a French guy. He's a banker. He's married into a very rich family, and he's been embezzling money for quite a long time, and now the trail has kind of come to an end. The authorities have caught up with him, and he has to make a desperate decision to get out of there just as the dragnet closes. There's a Mexican hitman, kind of just a paid assassin, probably the least interesting of the four. And then there's a Palestinian terrorist who does a bombing in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, one of the two cities there in Israel, and he has to, you know, go underground as well. This is, of course, a 1977 movie, famously released a week after Star Wars opened. It spent a lot of money. This was William Friedkin's follow-up to The Exorcist, which was the follow-up to The French Connection. Both huge blockbuster award-winning movies that made incredible sums of money. So he had free reign, final cut, big budget, and this is what he made. It is a sort of an adaptation of The Wages of Fear by Henry Georges Clouzot, based on a book by the same name. And he used that material because he really wanted to make a movie in the spirit of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, one of his favorite films as a younger man. Again, desperate men in a rough situation with this kind of delusional dream of escape and finally making it back to the good life maybe that they had known and had lost. So Friedkin, you know, invested a lot of resources into this movie, and it cost him because it did not make its budget back. It kind of soured his reputation, and it was a pretty big blow to his ego because he was convinced that Sorcerer was going to be a huge smash because he just had the formula. He knew what people were looking for, and he figured he didn't need big stars. He didn't need, you know, comedy or romantic leads or anything like that. He made gritty, hard-hitting films, and the audiences of the early to mid-70s were eating it up. But now we're in the late 70s. Jaws has already happened. Star Wars is happening. And all of a sudden, blockbuster, escapist entertainment is kind of ruling the day. And yeah, it's hard to compete with a film like Star Wars when this is just grimness and intensity with incredible pyrotechnics and hallucinatory, kind of surrealistic, kind of nightmare sequences towards the end, and absolutely gripping, riveting suspense as these men, I've talked about their desperate situation, their assignment is to transport 2 truckloads of highly explosive, dynamite that is kind of defective and is actually very susceptible to just spontaneous combustion as they make their way through this very hostile jungle interior to get the dynamite to an oil well that's caught on fire, and the only way of putting it out is to just throw a whole bunch of explosives at it, crater and collapse the flames, and hope that works, because it's a devastating disaster that has already killed a bunch of people. And of course, these are the lowest peasant grinding laborers, people of color, people who don't really matter in the big scheme of things, just grinded up and exploited for the system for the sake of the profits and the bosses who reap all the rewards. So yeah, there's some political commentary going on. There's again, suspense, tension. This is a film with just all kinds of interesting stuff going on over the course of its 2-hour runtime. There's a great score by Tangerine Dream that kind of adds another texture to all of the proceedings, especially when it gets into that kind of late middle section of the film, where it really is just kind of so tense, so, suspenseful and gripping that you just really don't know where things are going to go the first time through. And even watching it I think this is probably the third time I've seen it. I've watched it a couple times here, watched it once here in this incredible 4K restoration. Yeah, if you don't have it all memorized, it'll hit you with fresh chills and sensations as you even are revisiting. So, a wonderful package. One of the things that this does not have is any supplemental features. It's just the movie. It took a long time for this film to kind of get restored, even get recovered and retrieved. Like I say, it was kind of a notorious flop. It was kind of towards the end of the new Hollywood era, where some of the artistic freedom that had been given to some of the better directors of that time was starting to not pay the dividends that it did in the late 60s and early 70s. Francis Ford Coppola had done The Godfather, parts 1 and 2, The Conversation in the middle there, and then of course he was in the process, as Sorcerer was being made and released, of putting together Apocalypse Now, which, again, another bona fide classic movie, but it went way over budget. Its whole story of its making of harrowing tales. Sorcerer kind of fits the same bill. Maybe not quite as legendary in its making of as Apocalypse Now, but still pretty gritty stuff. This was, again, these are films without, computerized digital effects. Those explosions were real. Those trucks on the swaying bridge, that's real. There was some, studio magic that went into, keeping him on the bridge and not just sliding off into the river, although apparently that did happen several times. But again, very visceral, sweaty, grimy, draining, demanding filmmaking that took a very long time. It required months of commitment, not just from the stars or the lead actors, but from the extras, from the crew. It was just a very, very full-throated, whole-body experience that these filmmakers, the crew, and the cast dedicated themselves to bring Sorcerer to life on the screen. But this film, this version, does not have any extra features other than the nicely illustrated book that I've already mentioned. This one here is loaded. It has a couple really interesting supplements. Of course, this is one 4K with the film. There is no commentary track on the film itself. It's just the movie. But the Blu-ray, the second Blu-ray, has a feature-length documentary called Friedkin Uncut. And I'll tell you what, William Friedkin, he's been a known legendary character for a long time. But that film, which was produced in 2018, towards the end of his life, really showcases the guy and gives a great overview of his career, including a number of interviews that he gave over the years. And it really does round out this package quite nicely, because you get to know who this guy is and what William Friedkin was all about, what made him tick, and why he made the movies that he did the way that he did. And I think it really brings a lot of the best qualities of Sorcerer fully to life. There's also another lengthy interview that was recorded not that long ago as well. Of course, Mr. Friedkin has passed, but I think in 2015 it was, he sat down and did an interview with Nicholas Winding Refn, which has become a little bit notorious on the internet. Refn considers himself a younger version of William Friedkin. In fact, he makes that point maybe 4 or 5 times throughout the course of the interview, almost to the point of obnoxiousness, and Friedkin really isn't buying it. He is not impressed by Nicholas Winding Refn, who gives himself a little congratulatory pat on the back because he feels like he's made masterpiece level movies already, and Friedkin is just like, bullshit to that. So anyways, that interview I've seen little clips of. The back and forth between Refn and Friedkin is pretty amusing, but it's actually a pretty informative interview when you get the whole context placed before you there, without just kind of the memeable clips that have kind of lived on their own for the past several years. So I think, even though Friedkin, I think, comes across, kind of wins, if you want to consider it a conflict, they're actually pretty compatible for quite a bit of it. And, some of those moments are overstated a little bit, maybe you could say. But those two films, the Friedkin Uncut, which is a career-spanning documentary, and the interview with him and Nicholas Winding Refn, again, late in his life, as he's looking back, he's probably mellowed with age. He comes across, Friedkin does, as a thoughtful, introspective person who has, absorbed a lot of culture, a lot of ideas. His big thing is that people are neither entirely good nor entirely bad. We're all a complex mixture of ethics and principles and moral, aspirations, but also hypocrisy and interiorized corruption and fallibility and just kind of that self-serving, weak, indulgent side of ourselves. We all carry it with us. And that's what he's trying to portray in his films. And Sorcerer, again, is a wonderful, insightful study of that, and also just very engaging, entertaining, and, exhilarating in a certain sense, because you're kind of getting to take a vicarious ride into the pits of hell and survive. Now, not everybody that you see in this film does survive. No spoilers there, but, it's just too much to expect that foursome is going to make it all the way to the end. Let me also talk about the transfer. This 4K is absolutely eye-popping, stunning, glorious, radiant, beautiful. Just the colors, the blacks, the high resolution, the quality. Again, the soundtrack, there's a 5.1 or the original 2.0 stereo mix. They both sound great. They look great. There was nothing really wrong with this Blu-ray, but they've just kind of kicked it up to the next level here. And so, this is a highly recommended package. I absolutely love what they've done here. Also in Friedkin Uncut, there's a lot of other interesting commentators. Wes Anderson makes some appearances. Francis Ford Coppola, they were pals, him and Friedkin, throughout the 70s. Maybe rivals to a certain extent as well. But they all had some really complimentary things. And of course, with Wes Anderson and the Phoenician scheme and the kind of current rotation at the Cineplexes, I always enjoy hearing what Wes Anderson has to say. He's a great movie aficionado. There's also some audio interviews with Waylon Green, one of the screenwriters, and Bud Smith, the editor of the film. There's some behind the scenes, only like 6 minutes or so, of some of the New Jersey shots. That looks like it was made on sort of a Super 8 reel, but it's you just kind of get a sense of the atmosphere, at least in that part of making Sorcerer. I think those are the main highlights. Of course, I'll take another look at the inside of the box if you haven't seen that earlier clip. But yeah, this is the interior here. This is the inside or the exterior of the Digipack. You get the one 4K, you get the 2 Blu-rays, you get this nice little booklet, which has got a good essay in it. The essay is by Justin Chang, excellent writer, smart guy. And there's the little, accordion thing that folds out there. So again, as far as the paperwork is concerned, nothing that's gonna, rock your world, but it's quality. But again, the transfer of the film, the movie itself, and the special features make Sorcerer one of my highest recommendations for anybody who just wants to see, again, a real, grab you by the throat, cinematic experience. It deserved to do a lot better at the box office. Tastes were changing. It got buried by Star Wars. And I think there was also just a little bit of a backlash. The critics were not kind to this movie. I don't know what their problem was. I think sometimes negative reviews have to do with what people think about the filmmaker at that time. Maybe they're just a little sick of him or envious, or there's some bad blood or some axes to grind to kind of color the judgment. And of course, back in those days, if a critic gave it the old thumbs down, that made up the minds of a lot of people who took their opinions very seriously. That's all water under the bridge, so to speak. Sorcerer is a classic. You'll want to get this one on your shelf.